The governor of the state of Texas, the Republican governor, Greg Abbott, he contributed $50,000 of that $80,000 reward. But while announcing that reward, he seemed to find the need to describe the victims of the shooting as illegal immigrants. We're not sure what the immigration status of the victims has to do with it. And we'll also note that at least one of them was a permanent resident of the United States. Charlie Sykes, the governor, went out of his way to say that the suspect appears to be an illegal immigrant, but he also found the need to say that the victims, 5 victims, were also illegal immigrants to the United States. Talk to us about where the Republican Party stands right now on the issues, the twin issues of guns and immigration.
Well, that's an extraordinary moment that he felt the need to do that. This cried out for a little bit of compassion, for some leadership. Of course, we got neither of those. Look, the Republican Party has paralyzed itself. It has allowed itself to be held hostage to the NRA, to the most extreme voices. This is not new. But you know what's amazing is how deeply invested they are in the narrative that an armed society is a polite society, that the Second Amendment is about a well-regulated militia, that more guns means less crime. Well, think about the last week. Think about all those stories, Jonathan, that you just told. What we are seeing in this country. We are seeing a country overrun by guns, in which people distrust one another, they fear one another, and in which we continue to have our quote-unquote thought leaders who are ginning up that kind of dislike and disdain for one another. So we're having shootouts in parking lots, shootouts in people's driveways, on people's porches. And I would like to say that some of this is going to shock the conscience of the nation, but I'm afraid the conscience of the nation, or at least the Republican Party, has been numbed for too long about all of this.
Yeah, and David, it is, I mean, first of all, it's just, I can't ever remember any leader in the United States trying to somehow mitigate the pain of an 8-year-old, 9-year-old being shot in the head and other people being shot by identifying their status, feeling the need to say, oh, well, these were illegal immigrants that got shot and killed. That's the first thing. Again, there's just such a callousness to it, just like sending illegal immigrants up to Washington, D.C. on Christmas Eve and putting them outside of the Naval Observatory as they freeze outside when they get off the bus. But again, on the gun issue, too, again, just complete callousness. A cheerleader goes into the wrong car. She gets shot. A young woman drives into the wrong driveway. She gets shot in the back trying to leave that driveway. We've seen it time and again. A young man knocks on a door, the wrong door, looking for his twin brothers. He gets shot twice. This is a country out of control in gun violence.
It is. You can't look at the headlines and not feel precisely that. And the question for me, Joe, is when people say we can't live like this anymore, we just can't do it, and begin to break all the political certainties. You can't challenge the gun lobby. There's nothing that can be done at the federal level, and you have a kind of rebellion against the way we're living now. The callousness that is demonstrated by the incidents we're talking about, this sense that this is a problem that can't be fixed. It goes on year after year. The numbers, every week we get up waiting to hear about a new shooting. One of my children is a teacher, seeing her have to deal with preparations for mass shootings at her school, which every school in America has to do now. This is simply not a way to live. It's not viable. What the break point is, what it looks like, I can't say. Any problem like this, Joe, I always think a good leader would be defined by the ability to break through this sense of blockage and speak to the country about what everybody feels. We can't live this way anymore. But you don't see that person yet.
Yeah, and Charlie Sykes, it just seems like a matter of time when you have 90% of Americans supporting universal background checks. You have at least 75% of Americans supporting red flag laws nationwide. You've got an overwhelming majority of Americans supporting one gun safety law after another, and that includes Republicans, that includes gun owners, and and as David said, it's not like these tragedies are going to slow down. The Republicans know they're going to continue. They're going to continue in schools. They're going to continue in churches. They're going to continue in synagogues. They're going to continue in country music festivals. They're going to continue in Middle America. They're going to continue on the coast. This is inevitable. The question is, to paraphrase John Kerry, who is going to be the last school child to have to die because Republicans in state legislatures and in Congress won't step up and do what they know they have to do and what the American people want them to do.
And yet, Joe, we have members of Congress who show up wearing AR-15 pins. We have members of Congress who put out Christmas cards where they're posing with their family with weapons of mass destruction in schools. Look, I have to tell you, going back to 2012, if what happened in Newtown, Connecticut did not break the country, did not shock the country into action, I don't know what would. I mean, I still remember my reaction to that. I remember the debate that took place and how tragically we went back into this doom loop. So the question is, what will it take? How many school shootings? Well, how many school shootings have we had? And how many weeks have we started off with this conversation? And this is what happens when you have a paralysis. David made a very, very good point. At some point, is there some leader out there, someone from either party who can stand up and look the American people in the eye and say, we cannot continue to live like this? There have been a lot of people trying, but maybe that message can't be delivered anymore. I mean, maybe this is the American carnage that we've chosen. But the political indifference is breathtaking. Actually, I don't know whether my microphone was on, but when you read that tweet from Governor Abbott, I actually sort of blurted out, what? Because I hadn't seen that before, that he had felt the need to say these were 5 illegal immigrants. Think about the mentality, the insensitivity, rather than talking about this family that was caring for their children, a 9-year-old boy. Instead of the basic humanity, he felt the need to label them in the most divisive way that he can, because we know what the politics of Greg Abbott are. We know what the politics of Texas Republicans are when it comes to the gun issue and to immigration. So for him to connect the dots there takes just one more data point of the cruelty, the brutality. I mean, I'm not telling you anything when I say that for many of these politicians, the cruelty is the point, and that he felt the need to insert that line into that particular moment just reminds us of that.
It is a sad moment for our country, a tragic moment out of Texas, also sad for American democracy, when you actually have a governor of one of the larger states in America feeling the need to be hateful and to be callous after a mother tries to shield her 9-year-old child. Both are shot in the head. And instead of even a hope and prayers tweet, he feels like he has to stamp a label on the dead bodies, illegal immigrant. Just think about the mindset of that. Just think about the mindset of that. A guy who probably runs around, maybe he's part of this Christian nationalist movement. But what would Jesus do? You don't have to be a Bible scholar to know, not that. What a dreadful, shameful thing from the governor from a state that brought us Uvalde. And you do see, and as Charlie said, you saw what happened in Sandy Hook. It just shattered the country. And yet in Congress, they did nothing. Representatives, including Republican representatives in Connecticut, did something. You can go through Parkland. There was movement on guns in Florida after that tragedy. But then, Uvalde. Uvalde got some Republicans in Congress to do something, but not enough. The carnage continues. little children continue to get slaughtered by weapons designed for war. And still, the Republican Party does nothing.